What about libertarians in space? My next guest, Alex Salter, is an economics professor at the Rawls College of Business at Texas Tech University. He's joining me now to discuss his latest piece about how liberty might be served as the final frontier in space. Good morning, Alex. Thanks for joining us on the program today.
Austin, great to be here.
First questions first. Do you believe that Nicolas Cage is an alien?
Ooh, well, inquiring minds want to know. I think that we should take him at his word. If he says that he's from K-Pax or whatever, we should probably go with him on that.
All right, so give us the premise of this piece that you wrote, which I thought was pretty interesting.
So the premise is we know that there's a problem with liberty here on planet 3. Our political institutions have become atrophied. They don't really seem amenable to good government, pro-liberty reforms. So maybe we should think about in terms of, well, I should say, instead of reforming political institutions, maybe it's time to start thinking about forming new ones. But where? Pretty much all of the real estate here is monopolized by governments of various kind. Well, a natural solution presents itself. We don't have to look on Earth. We're actually getting to the space now, pun there, the place now where human beings might actually be able to have a sustainable presence in outer space, the surface of the moon, the surface of Mars, other heavenly and celestial bodies. And the really neat thing is, because of some international space treaties that were signed decades ago, no nation is permitted to extend its territorial jurisdiction into space, which means that space is, by international law, a quasi-anarchic domain where there could be some really exciting experiments for pro-liberty communities in the next couple of decades. I think that we're on the cusp of something interesting.
So wait a minute. I guess so we have treaties that prevent any government in the world from being able to advance their territory into space, but that doesn't stop private individuals from advancing into space, right?
There is some dispute about that, but the dominant consensus among people who interpret these treaties is that no, it does not stop private individuals. In fact, many governments of spacefaring nations, including the United States, have taken steps in recent years to clarify we still agree to the 1967 Outer Space Treaty, which is where all this comes from. We're not looking to extend our national sovereignty to outer space. Nonetheless, we do think that there is a role for private individuals and private entities to undertake space activities, including using space resources. So there might even be a system of space property rights that are feasible, so long as it's understood that these things are not defined and enforced in national courts.
What do you think that the first space communities would have to focus on?
Probably the very first space communities are going to be short-term scientific ventures that are going to be government sponsored, and there's probably going to be some legal dancing around. Well, we're using this, space dome to conduct experiments, but we're not really appropriating the land, so that doesn't run afoul of treaty considerations. Okay, fair enough. But in terms of sustainable long-term human presences, I actually think that this is going to be financed by private capital. I think guys like Elon Musk are actually serious when they're talking about, hey, we want to go to Mars and see what human beings can actually accomplish out amongst the stars. So what's really interesting about this is that if we have anything like a space social contract, it's probably just going to be a private contract. They're going to have to agree to a stipulated set of rules promulgated by the sponsoring entity, and those are going to be the basic laws of the land, so to speak, when it comes to Martian settlements or moon settlements or anything like that. So it's an interesting private governance story at the same time that's a pretty cool pro-liberty story.
You're just tuning into the Wake Up America show with Austin Petersen. You can text the show at 573-319-1586. I'm speaking to Alex Salter. He's an economics professor in the Rawls College of Business at Texas Tech University. And we're talking about an article that he wrote in the Lubbock Avalanche Journal saying, "To the stars, liberty on the final frontier." Elon Musk was criticized pretty widely for saying that Mars is a free planet. Why was he criticized for that?
That was a pretty interesting episode because when you look at where that was said, it was actually buried pretty deep in the terms of conditions and the Starlink satellite internet end user agreement. So I think that that shows you that although that this was ultimately coming from a legal contract about the use of satellite internet, Musk and SpaceX are definitely thinking ahead in terms of how is this technology going to be used? What are we going to extend it to in the decades to come? And so, of course, the usual group of NGOs and international quote unquote experts were basically calling him a robber baron, a monopolist. He wants to monopolize Mars. The talking class that never actually does anything except make other people's jobs harder. When you actually have entrepreneurs that are actually going out there and laying the foundation for meaningful human advancements in space, that's something that got everybody very riled up. But I don't think that we have to worry that anybody, let alone Elon Musk, is sort of laying the foundations for a space fiefdom, and he's going to make himself a space techno king or anything like that. It's about getting the initial conditions right so that we can actually get the buy-in among relevant communities and peoples that are actually going to have to populate these initial settlements, because you got to persuade people to go, and they're not going to go if they don't have an assurance that there's going to be a stable rule of law when they get there.
Would you go?
I would probably not go. I don't have that kind of courage. I think it's fascinating to talk about and fascinating to write about, but I'll be perfectly honest, I do not fancy myself being a Martian pioneer. That's probably something better for somebody who doesn't get motion sick just spinning around with his daughter.
If you're just sitting into the Wake Up America show with Austin Petersen, I'm speaking to economist Alex Salter about his piece talking about how property rights might only be protected if we go to infinity and beyond, or at least somewhere outside of our local somewhere outside of the third planet revolving around the sun. Alex, there are legal problems involved with getting setting up space colonies, and there are technical problems. Are the legal problems, bigger, would you say, than the physical problems that we face? Because as I understand it, and maybe you're not familiar with this, but I mean, there were some nuclear treaties that were signed back in the 1970s that prevent us from engaging in the kind of technological experimentation that would be required for us to build the types of spaceships we need to be able to get to really, either break free of our galaxy. Are you familiar with some of these?
That's interesting. I knew about the treaties. I knew about the nuclear treaties pertaining to space, but I didn't realize their technological implications for rocketry, although it does seem a natural extension. In terms of which one is the limiting factor, I would still probably say that technology itself is the limiting factor. We have pretty good rockets at this point, and there's no getting around the fact that if you wanted to build a settlement on Mars, the absolute soonest that we could get there is something like 8 months. That's not going to change for the foreseeable future, and that's a long time just to spend in transit. And so I think that at the same time as you're getting these sustainable developments in rocketry, propulsion technologies, and other things that are going to be making living in outer space more feasible, it's okay to have the legal innovations happen at the same time. And they're kind of different innovations in the sense that the technological innovations have to be done, they have to be complete just to get us there. But the legal innovations can actually evolve along with the communities themselves. In fact, it's probably better for liberty if we don't impose a one size fits all governance solution on future space situations. The chief function of the law is resolving actual human disputes, trying to give us a peaceful way where we can actually agree to disagree and find out who gets to do what and under what circumstances. That means that a good, flexible, liberty promoting legal system will only respond to meaningful human conflict rather than sort of abstract speculation or ideological considerations. So I'm perfectly happy letting the evolving body of space law grow up alongside these communities, but you got to actually be able to get there first, which means the rockets have to come before the legal legals.
And that leads me to my next question here. Why try and break the surly bonds of Earth, Alex? Why not just go out in the jungle of the Honduras or set up a platform out in the middle of the ocean and start a libertarian utopia out there?
What you build, governments can take away. Even a government that agrees, hey, you can have this land, build a charter city, build something like that, get a pro commerce legal code in there and generate some wealth. Once you have actually established that infrastructure, there's nothing stopping the local authoritarian, badly functioning government whom you're leasing from saying, hey, thanks for building all that wealth. That's ours now because we have an army and you don't. So there's this credible commitment problem we can't get around. And obviously, in space, when you're quite a larger amount of miles away from a rapacious government, that might not be something that's in terms that's immediately feasible in terms of terrestrial predation.
I mean, in the fact is that people have tried to do things like that, but they failed. But it hasn't necessarily, Alex, just been because of governments. I mean, the fact is that people who try and set up utopian communities, have failed. I mean, and many times that it's tried. I mean, didn't Henry Ford try something with like the rubber trees in South America or something like that? To set up a capitalistic society, and it all broke down. I mean, how sure are we that our libertarian ideals will actually hold water once, I guess the rubber hits Mars?
Henry Ford did do that, and it wasn't a capitalistic society. It was very much another utopian plan oriented towards maximal industrial production.
Hmm.
So you're right. The rubber has to ultimately hit the road. We have to ultimately come upon and devise rules for living well together. And it might be the case that the concrete rules that best hold together a space community are not small L libertarian rules. In that case, the hope for liberty is not in the actual rules that are developed, but in your ability to choose among different communities, right? I think that libertarians should be much more optimistic about exit rather than voice in terms of how do we actually get the rules that govern us that are going to maximize human flourishing. That's a discovery process. The best rules for governing the human condition are not handed down from on high. We have to figure them out. And there's going to be a lot of experimentation, a lot of trial and error, a lot of bottom up discovery. And it might be the case that the set of governance procedures that works best in a specific scenario might abrogate something that we refer to as individual rights. But as long as you can opt in or opt out of the community, that's not as much of a concern.
Alex, is there anything else on this topic that you think we should know before I let you go?
There's a lot of interesting stuff out there about outer space property rights, how you can actually have outer space communities when you can't actually appropriate the land. So there's definitely stuff out there that I would encourage you to read. But the one thing that I would actually direct your readers towards is an international agreement recently signed by NASA and a bunch of other spacefaring nations called the Artemis Accords, where these spacefaring nations explicitly said, we do not interpret the Outer Space Treaty to say that outer space property rights are impossible. In fact, we think that private ownership of resources to space resources are compatible with international treaty obligations. And we're going to support efforts of private individuals and private entities to go out there and try and capture that celestial wealth. So at least in the short to medium term, space agencies are going to have something to do with this before we get to SpaceX governed proprietary communities on Mars or something like that. And that's fine. There's obviously going to be a transition plan. Go and check out the Artemis Accords. They're short and they're encouraging, and it really does convey something of the romance and excitement of outer space.
Certainly very exciting, Alex. Great piece that you wrote over there. Alex Salter, a professor of economics at Rawls University of Business at Texas Tech. Thank you very much for your time today. Thanks for joining us on the program, and have a happy Merry Christmas and a happy holiday season.
Thank you. Merry Christmas.
Thank you very much. What did you think of Alex Salter? Send us a text at 573 319 1586.